Hi everybody, it is Tuesday morning and I feel like it has been a month of Sundays since we've done an around the world update, so that is exactly what we're going to do today before I even get my day started. So we're going to start here at the Waterfall Tank as we always do, and I have to admit I've kind of lost interest in my waterfall here as of late. It's been up and running for enough years now that it's not really new and exciting and novel anymore. It was kind of neat having a waterfall in my basement, but again, it's been here so long now, it doesn't seem like that's anything outstanding. I'm just used to having a waterfall in my basement, so I think that's got something to do with it. But I also know that getting those discus really had a lot to do with it. My focus just laser focused on those discus. I'm just enamored with them right now. And I've also set up a pond recently, and I got some goldfish out in the yard now, which is brand new to me. And so I got other things that I've been thinking about besides this waterfall, and as a result, it is starting to look what I will generously call very natural. It's growing in a very healthy way. It's not unfit for the fish or anything at all in any way. It just looks really rough when you get up close and start looking at it. You can see all this. Once upon a time, this was a piece of cloth material that I hung here in order to sort of make the water come down rather than hitting real hard and splashing. It was just running down that piece of cloth. Well, that cloth is completely overgrown with this green hair algae. You can see a strand of it here. This is all hair algae, and it's just growing all over everything in here. I don't worry too much about the cyanobacteria. That's this sort of really dark green stuff you can see in a few places. That doesn't bother me. But that hair algae is just growing everywhere. You see all this green sort of matted looking stuff. That's all that hair algae growing in there. Surprisingly, all of this is Java fern. You wouldn't think it because Java fern grows so vigorously underwater and it gets so big underwater. But once you see it growing on the surface and up out of the water, the Java fern actually looks more like traditional fern. It's very sort of short cropped. It doesn't grow long tendrils and strands like it does when it's being supported by the water. So I find that kind of interesting. But we got a lot of Java moss growing all over everything in there, and the plants are doing well enough. You can see my dead nettles over here doing well. I got a couple of pieces of cut pothos in here that are still doing okay. My arrowhead plant up there is doing fine. The tank itself, we'll turn this light on here. Get some of that tank light lit up. The tank itself is doing fine. As I said, the water is perfectly clean and fine and healthy. But I've got so much of that hair algae. All that mass of gross stuff in there, that's all hair algae. You can see it all growing through the Java Windelov. And like you will often see in summertime on the surface of ponds, you'll see that gross sort of swampy, bubbly looking stuff. That's all that hair algae growing up right there. Now that's probably not bubbled up like that from the light and, you know, the oxygen production, pearling and all that sort of stuff. That's probably simply just bubbled up because of the water, you know, running in right there and just creating some air bubbles that could collect it under there, and we're getting that little sort of mat floating on the surface. But that's all hair algae. You can see it's all back here. This is all hair algae. So that's the main thing I need to get in there. Just yank that out by the handful and get the tank a little cleared up. The tannins are building up in this tank. It's been a while since I've done a water change on it. It's starting to look like tea in there. So probably about time to get in there and do a little bit of maintenance. But again, the water's fine. The fish are healthy. Haven't lost any fish or anything like that. My foot tank, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. I don't want this to be a huge, long, round-the-world update. But I will say I found a living ghost shrimp in here yesterday. I do not know if it's the only one, but I know that there is at least definitely absolutely one ghost shrimp still in here. So it has been years since I put any ghost shrimp in this tank. So either that one is still alive after all this time, or they were in there breeding. I don't know, but I do know that a ghost shrimp can live for several years. I've had ghost shrimp in tanks for 2 or 3 years before. They're not a very short-lived animal like a lot of people think. You can get a few years out of a ghost shrimp if you put it in the right condition. So I do still have at least one ghost shrimp living in that foot tank down there. So I found that to be pretty exciting. So all right, let's move away from the waterfall. Let's get these lights turned out just so they don't create any more glare than we're going to already have when we start looking at some of the other tanks. Let's get my tripod out of the way. Told you this was an impromptu video. So my 29 miscellaneous, ticking over like a clock as usual. I don't know how long it's actually been since I've done Around the World update, so I will probably say that I have gotten in this tank and done some work since the last one. You can see that large piece of Anubias there has been chopped off the top. That was already mailed off to a friend of mine, so that is already gone, not for sale anymore. You can see a few other little changes to the plants. I got in there and trimmed up that Java fern a little bit, got some of the rougher, browner looking dead stuff out of there, and as a result you can see some nice vigorous new green growth on all that. Did a little tiny slight gravel vacuuming, very superficial. I don't really get down into the gravel when I do a gravel vac. And remember, this tank not only has a very shallow gravel bed, but that's not even real gravel. That's that fake dense plastic foam colored gravel. Most of it is the black that you can see, but I have a few little specks of the clown barf in there just as a tribute to my early days. You can even see I've got a couple of little, you see that white shiny thing right in the center of your screen right there? That's a glass bead. I have a few glass beads in this tank. Again, all just little tributes to my early days of keeping fish. And then of course my angelfish that we never really get a good look at is sitting in here and just looking beautiful. And the bigger this fish gets and the older it gets, the more its colors start to come out and develop, the more I like it. I know you think, like, what color? It looks like it's silver and black, but if you look around its gill flaps and it gets under the light the right way, it has quite a bit of iridescence in there, and there's some blues. It's a beautiful fish. It really is a beautiful fish. So I'm really happy with that one. I'm also happy with the fact that it doesn't seem to be growing really fast, and I suspect it will, even with those long fins on it, will be able to spend the rest of its life here in this 29 miscellaneous, which is what I was hoping for. Otherwise, everything smooth as can be, ticking over like a clock, not much to talk about, so we will go ahead and move on to my 55-gallon gourami tank. Now, this is another one that we don't have a whole lot to talk about, nothing new going on in here really, haven't made any changes or done anything, but I will say, now that I've been doing live streams, if you're not familiar with that, I do a live stream every Friday night and every Sunday night. And because of that, I just kind of want my tanks to look nice. I'm going to be sitting in front of them, talking, answering questions, showing the fish off to people, and I just want them to look pretty. You know, it's one thing for me to do the Around the World update where I can show you, like, hey, this is just what my fish tanks look like, and today they're messy. You know, I think there's value to that. You get to see real world conditions in my tank, and you don't always get to see my tanks right after I've polished them up and gotten them ready for their big, you know, close-up. I think that's disingenuous, people that prepare their tanks before they go to video just to make them look like they always look like this. I don't do that. I just show you what my tanks look like, and sometimes you'll see algae on the glass, and, you know, I mean, you just got to look at what my waterfall looks like, for crying out loud. But having said all that, you know, I'm shooting a video and I'm doing a live stream. I want the tanks to look nice, and so I've been stepping up my maintenance. I've been getting in there, and at the very least I've been wiping down the glass and doing a little bit of light gravel vacuuming to get any of the superficial detritus off the bottom. Again, I don't really get down into the gravel when I gravel vac. I just sort of, again, go over the surface and I pick up any loose you know, detritus or any little bits of fish poop that might be lying on the bottom, and that sort of thing. But for the most part, we don't go down into the gravel at all. So far, this tank is still ticking over. My giant angelfish in there, I don't know why she's just hanging out in the corner, probably thinking the food's coming in. I've actually taken to feeding this tank, not through opening the door, because it's kind of a pain in the butt, but if you notice there's enough of a gap right here, I've actually just been dropping the food down through there. And so all the fish sort of, you can see they all come right up to this left-hand corner now when they think it's feeding time, because that's where I've been putting the food in. So it's a little bit funny to see them all clustering up. Even the bottom dwelling fish will come in. It's one of my loaches right there. That is one of the new yo-yo loaches. There's two of the yo-yo loaches right there. And I don't know where the third one is at the moment. It's really interesting. The two, I always seem to see two together, and then there's always a third one that shows up eventually. And there he is. There's the third one. And then I've got that Angelicus loach, where if you don't look really closely, you'll get them confused for each other. But the Angelicus loach is actually a little bit smaller than the yo-yos, and the yo-yos are actually not that old. These are the ones that were in my experimental tank for so long before putting them in this tank, and you can see how much bigger they've gotten now that they've gone in here. So really happy with the loaches. And again, the tank's just sort of ticking over like a clock. The fact that I've been getting in here and doing more maintenance on it makes it look even better than it has in the past. So that's about all we got going on with the 55 gourami tank. Now we'll have a look at what I just call my 55-gallon tank, and we're going to get a little bit of a treat. While it's not looking very good at the moment, and honestly never has looked really good, but there's a little look at my South American Bumblebee catfish. That's not a fish that we get to see very often. And again, its barbels look rough, and it looks like it's panting for breath. And again, it just always looks like that every time I see it. I don't know if it really is distressed or if it just looks like that. I really can't tell, honestly. But we don't get to see it very often, so there's a little bit of a look at it. My angelfish here has been giving me a big scare. Every morning when I come in and turn the lights on, it's upside down and in the weeds, and it looks dead, and it takes a really long time for it to come around and recover and start swimming again. But once it does, it looks perfectly normal and healthy. It gets excited at dinner time and swims right up and starts gobbling the food up. Seems absolutely perfectly normal, except for those weird morning times when it seems like it's in a coma or something before it finally comes around. So not sure what's going on with this. It's not that old. It's maybe 5 years old, I want to say. Maybe 4 years old. Maybe not even 5 yet. So certainly not an age-related issue. It's not getting old like some of my fish are at the moment. I do have some fish that unfortunately are getting kind of old and probably aren't going to be with us too much longer. But this should not be one of them. So not really sure what's going on with that weird morning thing, but otherwise it seems to be doing pretty well. Giant Plecos still sitting in here. You can see it right there. Its head's up here in the bushes, and that's the length of its body, and there's its tail all the way down there on the bottom. So I really need to get in there and get this fish out of there. Until I get this fish out of there, I'm not really going to do any upkeep or maintenance on it other than doing the water changes and just keeping it clean. It just looks like crap. You know, it's got that cyanobacteria in there. It's got that it's Java moss. It's not hair algae, it's Java moss, but the Java moss is growing through all of my Anubias. And there's strings of fish poop all over the bottom of the tank. And so until we get that Pleco out of here, I'm not really going to worry about doing a whole lot of improvements on this tank. We're just going to kind of maintain it, keep it a healthy environment for the fish to live in. I'm not that terribly concerned about what it looks like aesthetically, as long as the fish are healthy and the water conditions are fine. You know, they're not the slightest bit worried about my housekeeping and whether or not there's some green stuff growing on the plants in there or whatever. The water's fine, the fish are fine. That's all I'm worried about at the moment. So make sure you're subscribed, and when I do get around to working on this tank, you'll get to see that. So speaking of tanks I need to work on, we're going to get over here to my 40 breeder. And this one will probably get some attention very soon, maybe this afternoon if the rain doesn't let up. If the rain does let up, I'm going to go out paddling around on the reservoir looking for some woodwork to go in the pond. So look forward to some updates on that coming up really soon. But if it does continue raining, I might get down here this afternoon and get in here. And we're just basically working on getting the tank cleaned up. If you've been following along with the process, you can see how much cleaner it's getting. Every single day this tank looks nicer and nicer. I've got an army of nearite snails in here that are eating up all of the blackbeard algae. But we're back to sort of battling between the blackbeard algae and the cyanobacteria. That is really, really weird. In my camera, that's coming out looking purple, but in my eyeballs, that looks completely green. I was going to say that that's green cyanobacteria sort of growing over the blackbeard algae, but it apparently is that red cyanobacteria that's growing over the blackbeard algae, and you can see how sort of thick and clumpy it is. So I'm going to get in there. There's a good look at it. You can see how like proud it is off of the wood there. It sticks up fully a half an inch or 3/4 of an inch off of the wood. And so I'm going to get in there with my little suction hose, not the gravel vac, but just an open-ended hose, and we're going to see if we can't remove some big chunks of that and just get that out of there. You can see some of this algae there on the bottom is sort of falling off. That's probably literally fallen off of the top section here and just fallen to the bottom, and is just lying there on the bottom. And in this corner, you can see I got a bunch of that stuff that needs to get vacked up and out of there. That is so weird. That looks completely dark, like forest green to me. I mean, straight up just forest green. And then you get it on camera, and it looks downright purple. This is really killing me. That looks so absolutely dark foresty green to me, and then I look at it on camera and it comes out purple. And I know what it is. It's a combination of both. I have one tank where there's a rock in it, and when I pour the water on the rock, it's like, you ever seen that cloth that changes colors? Like if you rub your hand one way, it looks all shiny and silvery, and if you go the other way, it turns blue or something. That's the way this stuff is. When I pour water across it, it'll go from looking green to looking red. And I'm assuming the same thing is happening here. It's just my camera's only picking up the red, not picking up the green for some reason. That's just really weird. Anyway, moving on. I'm getting distracted by tricks in my camera. Moving on to my other 125 Darryl, my New World tank. Once again, nothing really going on in this tank, just ticking over like a clock. I did lose my creek chub. I forgot about that. That is something that happened, but it happened about a week ago, and I forgot. It's been more than a fortnight since we've done one of these videos. Probably it's been a couple of fortnights since we've done one of these videos. As I already said, I believe it's been a month of Sundays, and so that's definitely more than a fortnight. Creek chub died of old age, not really anything to be concerned about. Was a little bit bummed out to see it go, but again, it went because I'd had it for so many years. When I caught it, it was already probably a few years old, and then I had it for 4 years, and their natural lifespan is only about 5 years, maybe 6 years, something like that. And so I had it for long enough that it lived out most of its life in my tank. And again, I was watching it fade over time. I could see that it was getting older. I could see that it wasn't, the fish that it used to be. So it was no surprise to come down one day and find it no longer with us. But that is the case. The creek chub is no longer with us. Other than that, I really cannot think of anything else going on in the tank here. It's just looking good, ticking over like a clock, like most of my tanks seem to these days. I don't really have too many issues anymore. I think one of the reasons I have less issues now is my more active use of air stones. I've got air stones in just about all of my tanks now. Not all of them, but just about all of them now have air stones in them. And I want to remind you all that I just said that I want to go out on the reservoir looking for woodwork to go in my pond outside. And again, I would just like you to think about and consider, if this is the kind of woodwork I collect to put inside and in my aquariums, just imagine what I'm going to be looking for to put outside in a pond out in my backyard. I very much have the mentality of going bold or going home. And so we are going to go find a bold piece of wood to go in my pond outside one of these days if the weather breaks. So moving on to my snail tank. Yes, the water is turning green again. I had the water blacked out. I blacked the tank out to make the algae die off in the green water. But then I bought some water clarifier to clear up some little bit of debris and some cloudiness from the sand in my pond. And in doing a little bit of research on water clarifiers, I found out that they're not supposed to work on like bacteria blooms, algal blooms. It's supposed to work on like inert material like sand and dust and fish food and that kind of stuff. So I'm actually really curious, because I've used water clarifiers on what I assume were bacterial blooms, nitrogen cycle issues, and they always worked. Within 24 hours it would clear up, and then it would get cloudy again later, but it would clear it up first. And so I'm interested to see if algae, green water, will get cleared up by using a simple water clarifier. I don't know if it'll solve the issue or not. It may only clarify it for a day or two, and then it may start turning green again, or it may do nothing at all. I don't know, but you know what? We're going to find out, and that's why I got the light turned back on, because I want that water to get nice and green again, and then we're going to see what that water clarifier does to it. So again, I would encourage you to make sure you're subscribed, and you'll catch that video whenever I shoot it. So moving on to my native tank. This tank is just one that I don't really do anything to anymore. I don't believe the crayfish is in there. I've not seen hide nor hair of it. Well, actually, I guess that makes sense, since a crayfish has neither hide nor hair. So let's start again. I've not seen carapace nor antennae of the crayfish in there in a very long time. I used to have this tank set up so it was sort of escape proof, but I got to admit, once the plants started growing and the pothos grew in a little bit, this plant is anything but escape proof. I mean, pretty much anything could just pretty much stroll up that and walk over to the ledge there, and then they're out of the tank, or anything else. So the crayfish is probably not in here. I'll probably find that all desiccated in a corner somewhere one day. I do need to get in and get the pump flowing again. I got to get in here pretty much every day and get that pump cleared out because it just reduces to a dribble within 24 hours. I'll clean it out. We'll get a little bit more water flow, and then it'll reduce to a dribble again. In fact, if you give me a second, I'll go ahead and do it while we're right here on camera. This too, I know you look at that and you think that looks like some terrestrial moss. It looks like some moss I might have growing in my backyard. I put that there myself, and that is Java moss. I put a big old patch of Java moss down here when I first put this in the tank, and I've been watching it grow and spread and make its way all the way up the side of that piece of log. So that is actually Java moss. All right, let me get in here and wrestle the valve. It's got the adjustment where you can turn it one way and it reduces the flow, and you turn it the other way and it increases the flow. It's not the screen on the front of it, or the grate, whatever you want to call it, and all I gotta do is sort of turn that back and forth, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise a few times, and it just sort of knocks all the crud loose off of it, and then we get the water flowing again. I did just top this tank off yesterday. When the water's a little bit lower, you can actually see the water dripping off the log here and there, but the water level was getting really low, so I went ahead and just topped it off. Can't see anything in the tank, of course, because of the dense cover of duckweed. I do have a regular long-time viewer that was asking me about some duckweed recently, so if you're watching, I do have duckweed available now. If you're interested in that, send me an email. I'll get you some duckweed sent out to you. So again, not a lot to talk about in this tank, not really a lot to look at with this tank. Most of what you can see on this tank that looks pretty and fun to look at is above the water anyway, and we've already gotten a look at that, so we're just going to move on. We're already more than 20 minutes in. Moving on to my 125 Darrell, also my discus tank, also my 125. I don't know what to call this tank anymore. And if you don't get the 125 Darrell jokes or whatever, I'm not going to bother explaining. That's something from a members live stream long ago. But I will say that I've been calling my Gourami tank Larry. I've been calling this tank my 125 Darrell, and I've been calling that other tank my other 125 Darrell. So if that doesn't clue you into the joke, then you're a lot younger than I am. So nothing really going on in this tank other than awesomeness. It looks fantastic. The discus are super amazing. I'm really just so stoked about these fish. I cannot get over them. They're absolutely gorgeous. My Tenopoma in this tank is one of those fish that is starting to show its age. You can see him down here. I'm not worried that I'm going to come down and find him dead on any given day, but it's, you know, he's definitely starting to show his age. It's you know, I'm starting to emotionally prepare myself for it's not going to be too much longer. We did lose one of my Marcy rainbow fish, so this is my last remaining Marcy rainbow fish. That too was a very old fish. The other one was in such bad shape I had to put it down. I was not fortunate enough to just come down and find it dead in the morning. I had to do it myself, which I always hate doing. And ever since then, this last remaining Marcy rainbow fish just does this all day. It just sits there, faces into the current at the spray bar, and it just kind of hangs out and just faces the wall like it's just kind of lonely and waiting to die, which is weird because I do have other rainbow fish in this tank, and it used to swim around and they all used to school together. And so now again, I think this is just sort of that odd behavior that we're seeing from a fish that's getting really old. Doesn't even really get that active when it's feeding time anymore, and so probably not going to be too much longer for that rainbow fish either. Again, that's my last remaining Marcy rainbow fish, and that one's probably 7 or 8 years old. I've probably had them that long now. That Tenopoma was probably more like 8, maybe pushing 9. So we'll have to wait and see how that all turns out. So not to make that too much of a bummer, you know, that's just how time works. Things age. These discus, again, are just so amazing. This tank is just sort of transforming. It had more of an African sort of feel to it with the Tenopoma in there, and I used to have that Synodontis. I do have another Synodontis in this tank now, but it's not very outgoing, and we don't see it very often. But I do have a Synodontis Euteris in here, or Euteris, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. But it's African Featherfin Squeaker, as they sell them at the PetSmart. I got the chocolate zebra plecos on the bottom. But I've got fish from all over the place. South America. I got the gouramis from Indonesia. Got the Tenopoma and the Synodontis from Africa. Rainbow fish from New Guinea or Australia. So this tank doesn't really have a theme other than looking awesome and being beautiful and colorful. And just looking awesome. I'm so in love with this tank. This is, I mean, it was always one of my favorite tanks, but it has rapidly become just like, I'm so in love with this tank. I've once again, after years and years of just kind of getting used to having some, fish in my basement, I'm back to like standing in front of my fish tank, just staring at my fish again. It's nice. I feel like it's just sort of reinvigorated me into the hobby. I also added my black spike snail to this tank, and I added my rabbit snail to this tank. So those are two not fairly new additions, but again, it's been so long since we've done one of these around the world updates, it's worth mentioning because it's probably new to you. So moving on, tearing ourselves away from that awesomeness, we will look at this tank, which I also think is pretty awesome. Love this tank. Bad news on this tank, I did find, I used to have the pair of German blue rams in this tank, and you'll note I said used to. You can see I only have the one now, and that is because I found the female all dried up on the floor right in front of the tank the other day. So whatever happened, not sure why, but she jumped out of the tank overnight, and when I came down in the morning I found her all dried up and crispy on the carpet right in front of the tank. But she was still looking good. She didn't mysteriously die from being in the tank conditions and all the issues I used to have with the German blue rams. I don't seem to have those issues anymore. This one just looks amazing. The one I have upstairs in my wife's tank looks absolutely amazing. And so I'm not real worried about their health. It's just one of those unfortunate things. Something might have spooked it, might have scared it. Maybe one of the other fish banged into it and startled it, and it just wound up jumping, and it came up and out of the water. I don't think the German blue rams are really known for being jumpers. So that was probably a little bit of an oddball and not anything I really have to worry about going forward. So there you go. Like I said, if you're going to have an open top tank, that's a risk you take. I'm aware of that. I've had open top tanks for many years, and I've had that fate happen to many fish over the years. It's just one of the risks you take. My quarantine tank had green water in it, but I did a series of really massive water changes, and I got the water to turn clear again. I know it has sort of a greenish tint. Some of that is the green algae growing on the glass, but a lot of that is the light shining down through all that floating water sprite that just gives sort of that greenish glow. But the water itself is all cleared up. The black skirt tetras, the longfin black skirt tetras, they've been in here so long now, I forgot when I bought these, so I definitely think it's time for them to be able to come out of quarantine. As far as that redwag platy, that's been in here forever. I had redwag platies in this tank for a long time. They were even breeding in here before I got them all out, but I missed one, and that's the one, and it's still in there, and it's been in there with these other fish in quarantine forever now. So I don't know where these fish are going to go just yet. I was going to put them in my office tank. At this point, I'm not entirely sure where I want to put them. So that's why they're just kind of sitting where they are. They're fine where they are. Whenever I get around to figuring out what I want to do with them, I'll put them in a tank somewhere. So moving on to my last, but certainly not least tank. In fact, let me get my forward light fixture turned on here so we get a little better look in the tank. I have done a fairly significant amount of work to Butterbean's tank here. I think I need to stop calling this my Brackish tank because I do not keep it anywhere near brackish anymore. In fact, I did not even put any salt water in it last time I did a water change. So that is pretty much down to fresh water, and the reason I did that is because I'm treating it for cyanobacteria. I've struggled with that red cyanobacteria in this tank for years, and my experience is that red cyanobacteria thrives in the saltier water. So I know the fish will be okay in fresh water, at least for a little while, but that red cyanobacteria will not, or at least doesn't seem to be, especially with treating it with the ChemiClean. I pulled a bunch of the Java moss out, or Java fern out. Any of the Java fern that wasn't like attached to anything, I took out of the tank. I'm actually treating that with ChemiClean to get any cyanobacteria off of that. I'm going to get that all cleaned up. We're going to put it back in the tank. I've got some Anubias we're going to add in here. We might rearrange the rocks a little bit.
But we're finally getting Butterbean's tank nice and cleaned up. We got all that hair algae out of here, and again, I've reduced the water all the way down to a salinity that is, you know, 0.01, 0.001 or something like that. It's barely got any salinity left in it, because I've done a fairly large series of fairly large water changes on it. And after the series of water changes, without ever putting any salty water back in, it's got very little of the original salt that was in there from when I had it set up as a brackish tank. So I'm probably going to leave it just, you know, where it is. A little tiny bit of salt in the water, but not very much at all. Butterbean seems to be happier. Those marks, every time I reduce the salinity, the marks seem to get less and less on him. And so I think he's probably going to be better off in the water with just a little bit of hardness, a little tiny bit of salinity, but nowhere near the level of being brackish water. So I'm very glad to say we're finally getting his tank all nice and cleaned up. So once again, I'm going to say make sure you're subscribed. You won't miss any of the updates on this tank, or once we start putting it together, getting it remodeled, revamped. Butterbean will have some new stuff to look at, some new plants to investigate. And who knows, maybe we'll throw some shrimp in the tank or something like that and see if he gets along with them, or see if he hunts them down and uses them for food. He did have one ghost shrimp that he lived with for about 3 years. That's the shrimp I had that lived for quite a few years. It actually lived in a tank with a puffer for several years. So that was interesting. So alright everybody, I'm going to try to wrap this up before my camera file runs out of juice and I have to split it into 2 files and do all that stuff. And that gives me a bunch of extra work, so we're going to wrap it up right here. I'm going to say thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed once again. Don't forget, I do my live streams every Friday and Sunday night. You know all the routine. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, share it with your friends, put it on your social media, tell your mother about it, etc., etc. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. See you real soon in the next one.